On the night of December 23, 1944, snow fell heavily across the forests and narrow roads of Belgium and Luxembourg. It muffled the sound of engines and footsteps, giving the illusion of calm. To a civilian, it might have felt peaceful. To the men fighting there, it felt like the calm before something worse. For weeks, the German army had been pushing west in what would later be called the Battle of the Bulge. It was their last major gamble on the Western Front, an attempt to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace before Germany collapsed entirely. By this point in the war, Germany was already losing. Fuel was scarce. Experienced soldiers were gone. Allied air power dominated the skies. And yet, for a brief moment in December, the German offensive had done the unthinkable. It had shocked the Allies. Entire American units had been pushed back. Supply routes were threatened. Confusion spread faster than accurate information. And on this cold night, the future of the Western Front rested not on a battlefield, but on decisions being made in dimly lit command rooms. Wars are often described as if they move cleanly from one phase to another. In reality, they are chaotic, uneven, and deeply human. By late 1944, Allied commanders believed they had control. France had been liberated. Paris was free. German forces were retreating. Victory seemed inevitable, a matter of time, not uncertainty. That belief created a dangerous illusion. The German counteroffensive shattered it. Suddenly, the front lines on Allied maps were outdated within hours. Roads thought to be secure were cut. Units meant to rest were thrown back into combat. Weather grounded Allied aircraft, neutralizing one of their greatest advantages. In the middle of this chaos, senior commanders faced a terrifying question. Was this just a temporary setback, or the beginning of something much worse? One American general stood out during this period, not because of dramatic speeches or bold public statements, but because of his temperament. He was calm to the point of seeming detached. He spoke slowly. He listened more than he talked. And he was deeply aware that confidence, when misplaced, could be fatal. Unlike some of his peers, he did not believe wars were won through bravado. He believed they were won through logistics, coordination, and making fewer mistakes than the enemy. That belief would be tested brutally in the days ahead. The German offensive had created a massive bulge in the Allied lines. At its center were several critical road junctions, small towns whose names meant little to civilians but everything to supply officers. If those junctions fell, entire Allied armies could be cut off. One town in particular became a symbol of the problem. It was not heavily fortified, it was not strategically impressive on a map, but every major road in the region passed through it. Losing it would mean chaos. Holding it would require something the Allies were running out of: time. Information during war is always incomplete, but during the Battle of the Bulge, it was dangerously unreliable. Reports contradicted each other. Enemy strength was overestimated in some areas, underestimated in others. Weather prevented aerial reconnaissance. Commanders were forced to make decisions based on fragments. One such decision involved moving entire divisions, tens of thousands of men, across icy roads, under constant threat of ambush and air attack once the skies cleared. There were no perfect options. Every possible move carried the risk of disaster. It is easy to forget how personal these decisions were. Behind every arrow on a map were real people: drivers, medics, cooks, infantrymen, mechanics. Many had been fighting continuously for months. Many were exhausted, cold, and afraid. The commander responsible for ordering their movement understood this deeply. He later wrote that the hardest part of command was not issuing orders, but knowing that those orders would cost lives, even when they were necessary. That night, he barely slept. Traditional military thinking favored caution: secure one position before moving to the next, protect flanks, avoid overextension. But the situation no longer allowed for traditional thinking. The general made a choice that went against instinct. He prioritized speed. Instead of slowly reinforcing threatened positions, he ordered rapid redeployment. Units were moved laterally, sometimes abandoning prepared defenses to establish new ones elsewhere. It was risky, it was unconventional, and it relied on the assumption that the enemy would not react fast enough. That assumption was everything. For the men on the ground, the order came suddenly. There was little explanation, no dramatic speeches, just instructions to move immediately. Convoys stretched for miles, trucks slid on icy roads, engines froze, soldiers slept sitting up, rifles across their laps. Some units traveled through towns that had been quiet for months, only to hear artillery again hours later. No one knew how long the movement would last, only that it mattered. German commanders saw the movement but misread it. They believed the Allies were pulling back in disarray, attempting to stabilize a collapsing front. This belief aligned with their expectations and reinforced their confidence. What they failed to understand was that the movement was deliberate, not retreat, repositioning. That misinterpretation delayed their response by crucial hours. In war, hours can decide everything. When German units finally advanced towards what they believed would be weakly defended positions, they encountered something unexpected. Prepared defenses, concentrated artillery, fresh units ready to fight. The advance slowed, then stalled. The offensive that once seemed unstoppable began to lose momentum, and momentum, once lost, is hard to regain. There was no single dramatic clash tied to this decision, no famous last stand, no iconic photograph, no decisive surrender. Instead, there was something less dramatic but far more important: prevention, a disaster that never happened. History tends to celebrate victories that are visible. It often ignores victories that take the form of avoided catastrophe. This was one of those invisible victories. Success did not come without sacrifice. Vehicles broke down and were abandoned. Soldiers suffered frostbite. Accidents claimed lives even without enemy fire. Medics worked constantly. Engineers repaired roads under shelling. Commanders made adjustments on the fly. The cost was real, even if it didn't appear in headlines. The general who made the decision did not seek recognition. In fact, he was uncomfortable with praise. He believed that war should not produce heroes, only outcomes. Years later, when asked about that period, he downplayed his role. "We did what needed to be done, no more, no less." That response reveals something important about leadership in war. The most effective leaders are often the least celebrated. By stabilizing the front, the Allies regained something priceless: initiative. They could now choose where to concentrate forces. They could resume planning offensive operations. They could exploit German weaknesses rather than react to them. Within weeks, the German offensive collapsed entirely. The Battle of the Bulge would become Germany's last major attempt to change the course of the war in the West. This story is not just about World War II. It is about decision-making under pressure, about acting with incomplete information, about understanding when caution becomes dangerous. In business, politics, and life, the same principles apply. Waiting for certainty often means waiting too long. Modern warfare relies heavily on technology. Satellites, computers, and instant communication have transformed how wars are fought. But this story reminds us that even with limited information, human judgment remains central. No algorithm could have calculated the risk perfectly. The decision required intuition, experience, and a willingness to accept responsibility. Those qualities cannot be automated. As January 1945 progressed, the front lines stabilized completely. Snow melted, skies cleared, Allied aircraft returned in force. What had once felt like a potential catastrophe faded into memory. Soldiers moved on to the next objective. Commanders turned their attention eastward, and the moment passed. History often tells us what did happen. It rarely tells us what almost happened: the encirclement that was avoided, the decision that prevented disaster. Those moments are harder to dramatize, but no less important. Looking back, it is tempting to view the Allied victory as inevitable. It wasn't. It was the result of countless decisions made by individuals under extraordinary pressure. Some succeeded, some failed. All carried consequences. This story is one of the successes, not because it was flawless, but because it worked. On that snowy night in December 1944, the war stood at a crossroads, not because of a single battle, but because of a decision. A decision to move instead of wait, to risk instead of hesitate, to trust judgment over certainty. The men who made that decision didn't know how history would judge them. All they knew was what needed to be done. And sometimes, that is enough. World War II was not only shaped by famous battles and well-known generals. It was shaped by quiet moments, imperfect information, and human judgment. If you want more stories like this, where history turns on decisions rather than explosions, there are many more waiting to be told.